Okay, I'm gonna start the audio in three, in two, and one. Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. Tonight, their second time, at least on the podcast, Mitch Creedy joins us for a special edition today of PAR, Philosophy and Religion. You know how I run things around here. I'm going to just say, so what do you want to talk about? After all, it was your idea to come back to PAR. So what is your philosophy about life? Go through all the spiritual experiences you've had, everything you tell me, everything you want to tell me, and do not tell anything you do not want people to know. But you can dig in as far and as deep as you want to go. Your hour starts now.
I love that. What an intro. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. I know it's kind of a bit controversial to have someone more than once, but I really
Not at
am
all.
so I'm really so fascinated by the topics that you present on PAR because for myself, I'm I love spiritual matters. I'm studying to be a minister in the United Church of Canada, and I just really enjoy talking about spirituality in all of its forms. And so basically, for me, when I was growing up, I kind of had exposure to a lot of like a variety of spirituality concepts. So I had everything like from family members who believed in a spiritual path that believed in karma, and then I went to a school where everything was Christian. So I kind of had everything in between too. And then I kind of grew up and I got into, crystals and all kinds of things and energy medicine, all kinds of different things like that. And I've got some friends who are into shamanism. So I love it. I absolutely love it. Um, and I think that before I say anything, it's important to say that we are all on our own spiritual journeys. And so, whatever I say is relevant to me, but it's not necessarily relevant to you listening, or maybe it is. So I invite you just to hear it with an open mind because it's not we're all on our own spiritual journey and we're all going to have our own teachings because of that journey. So there's in my world, there's no like right or wrong way here. Um, Aaron, one of the questions that I often kind of have been asked is around my blindness. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but people will often say to me, well, why am I blind? Or why, they'll sort of feel sorry for me because I'm blind. And I used to really struggle with how to respond to that. And a few years ago, I was suddenly struck by sort of a realization that, I really don't feel sorry for myself that I'm blind because in my way that I've chosen to process that is that I kind of, for some reason, I co-created and I decided that I was going to come into this life and come into it and be blind for whatever reason. Who knows what that reason is? It doesn't matter. But once I started to really delve into that concept, and it is controversial, and again, right? Nobody has to take this on. But once I started to delve into that, things started to become a lot easier for me. I started to sort of be more, things would happen to me, and I'd think, well, yes, I'm really frustrated by this, but I wonder what this experience is teaching me. Not that I didn't feel frustration. I have felt a lot of frustration in the last year, but what is this teaching me? And I wonder, how I can take these these lessons and finally learn them because I seem to keep, having the same patterns of things going on in my life, right? So I guess, yeah, I guess that's where I start is I just really feel very strongly and I felt in that moment like I had actually taken back my power in that moment because I had said, well, for whatever, we don't know how we come here and how we decide how it's decided what's going to happen. Maybe, I used to think maybe blindness is just random thing that happened to me. And I found that when I was thinking in that way, it felt really challenging and very, very difficult. So I don't know, maybe it's just my brain's silly little way of trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. But it was a huge comfort once I did that.
Sure, absolutely it is. I really like the fact that you are have noticed that there probably is some sort of reason why you're here, right? And this is something that I admit with every passing year. And I know that you're a couple years older than me, but I'm 32, and with every passing year, I start to wonder this too, because here's the reality, and this is an opinion that I have, is that there has to be some reason why, when I was born with a disability. There has to be a reason. And here's what I mean. The reason? Why was I born with a disability? Well, because I was born with glaucoma and cataracts in my eyes. And I was also born with something wrong with my heart, right? So there has to be that would be the reason for why or what happened when I was born. The doctors noticed right away, right? But what is the real reason? And I, Mitch, will tell you point blank that, okay, come on in. We have someone from our audience there who's sitting in. So now we have an audience member who's in the audience up there. What I really want to tell you, Mitch, is that I am very certain, and I have actually been stumbling across some videos about this, and I'm kind of suspicious that before we are born, we apparently agree to certain things in life so that our spirit can go through some sort of journey. And so there is a reason for why we are blind. But the problem is, if we know what the real reason is, we would be at the end of our spiritual journey, right? So
Exactly, exactly.
so that's part of the problem, is that the answer, through watching other people on YouTube that I've just stumbled across over the years, who apparently, and this is where we're really gonna really go full throttle here, who talk about their, pre-birth memories and apparently pre-birth planning. And to cut to the chase, no, I don't have any memories of that. But actually, many people do apparently have this memory of before being born. And to make a long story short, what it really shows is that you are somewhere before you're born, that there is a purpose to every life, and that it's up to us to go about our spiritual journey the very best way we can, so that hopefully by the end of our life, we will eventually figure out why we're here. Now, part of the inherent spiritual problem with this whole thought process is that even when we're alive, at the end of our lives, we still don't really know what the purpose of our lives were. That's why before people pass away, they oftentimes ask those types of questions, because they still don't know. And I am very convinced, as someone who, over my lifetime, I've seen a couple people pass away. And, as a child, you don't really get it. You just say, oh, so and so died, they got old and died. But until you become an adult, you don't really start to think what happens. And I've gently thought about will probably happen is that the first thing that supposedly happened is you learn about things. You do a lot of learning. You learn about the purpose of your life. So, wanted to dig in with that with you. What do you think about this whole concept of, the fact that many people around the world apparently have these pre-birth memories. B, the fact that we're on this spiritual journey. So, Mitch, how do you digest our spiritual journey, and what do you really think?
I have a very similar thought process to what you described. I've been looking into a lot of different shamanic teachings recently, and one of the things I've been learning is exactly this, that we do before we're born, we kind of make agreements about this life, and it's been really interesting to learn about that. So I'm starting to kind of delve into that. I know also that there are people who have had what do you call it now, who have had past life regressions, and so
Right.
they go and
That's
they actually can
that's
see.
different. Let me just, because we're using a lot of complex spiritual vocab. We're using a lot of fancy vocabulary here. Let me just stop you only to make your point stronger. A past life regression is not what I was talking about. That's not the same thing as a pre-birth memory. Those are two totally
Oh yeah,
different
no, I
things.
know that.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
I
know
know
that you
that. I
know that,
was
but
going to
we
explain
need
that.
to we need to remind our friends around the world at home that we're talking about two totally different things. The words are very similar, but they're totally different. Past
For
life
sure, and I was
regression,
just about to
right?
get to that
Sure, sure,
actually.
sure.
So yeah.
Dig into that point. So, what is the difference that you've learned about past life regression and that whole concept? Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to explain that what that means is that people say that they have looked into what they may have been in past lives, and they can see who they were in past lives. Maybe they were, whoever they were. But where my point was is that they can actually sometimes the things that they have agreed to in past lives, they'll actually agree to come and learn that lesson differently or deeper in this life. Some, like I've heard people say that sometimes they agree to come back and be with those same people from a previous life, but in a different form, because they still have agreements with those particular people that they need to live out in this life. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting for me to look at that pre-birth planning, and in terms of how does it relate to past lives. And I think there's a lot of work we can do in this life, in our spiritual journey, to sort of make those agreements, like fulfill them, or to, sometimes there's actually even things that one can let go of and release, right? Through certain practices and things like that. I don't know a lot about that. But yeah, I'm very, very, what you said about sort of pre-birth planning. I mean, it would make, obviously nobody knows, because, nobody's here to tell us, but it would make sense that, we would have some say in what this is going to be about and what this life's going to be about. And I think you bring up such an amazing point about sort of um, how to, pre-death, like asking those deep questions and pondering those deep questions. Um, so and a lot of times you're absolutely right. We don't know. We don't know. We die, and maybe we don't even know what the purpose was. Probably most of the time we don't, because it's kind of deep soul learning that we can't access until we can.
Sure. No, I mean, I think once we live out our life and pass away, especially if we pass away of natural cause, if we live out a good life and live to be very, very, very old, and then pass away naturally when we're supposed to, then I think definitely what happens. So I guess I'm sharing my opinion that what will happen is I will learn when it comes to that, I will learn the purpose of my life. So I guess I
Right.
kind of do think that will happen, I guess.
Yeah.
And that we will learn about purpose and why things happened. And even more critically, we will understand why things did not happen. We will understand all the things that went wrong along the way. Once
Yeah.
I was speaking with someone else who is spiritual like you, and he asked me a good question, and he knows, as you do, he knows that I'm a Jewish guy. And so he was asking me, Aaron, this whole concept of Messiah, and how, you Jewish people think that we only have a couple hundred years left until the world, comes to the end. And he asked me a good question, and I'm going to phrase it to you. I'm going to ask you the question, and then I'm going to give the answer that I gave. He asked me, Aaron, he says, so when the Messiah comes back, how will we know? And what is Messiah to you? So I wanted you to take a stab at it, and then I'll tell you what I think happens.
Wow, that's a good question. Um, I to be honest, I have never really I haven't pondered it all that much because I'm very focused on living in the now. And I don't put a lot of thought into the end of the world. I don't take the Bible literally, and so I don't haven't really pondered that. But I think if that were to take place, how would we know? Well, that's for me, I that's a great question because we have had so many false kind of like such false starts in terms of people saying, oh, the world's going to end at this date. But I guess for me, I tend to think about those kinds of conversations as um, rather than saying, the world's going to come into a big crash, boom, bang, and off we go. It's for me, it's important to how do I create that what I call like new heaven, new earth kind of stuff? How do I create that as I'm living in this world, and how are we evolving to create that kind of situation where we are living into that? Um, I just live really from a place of hope. I don't I mean, I know there's a lot of problems in the world and I make myself aware of that, but I'm very much, because my the reason that I do that and the reason that I say that is because I think sometimes if we're so focused, and some people are very focused on the end of the world and the coming of the Messiah, and they go into the headspace of this is not my home. This is not actually where my home is. And for me, I don't want to live from a place of this is not where I belong because this is exactly where I belong right now. I'm here because there's a reason. How will the world end in 200 years? I have no idea. I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Which is very different from what you said. I'm actually surprised and glad that I asked you first because you said something that I didn't think you would say. I thought you would have said something more along the lines, but it's fine that you didn't because that's why this is a dynamic conversation about spirituality. You know, I think actually very differently about that. It's important to live in the present. But like we were saying a moment ago, it's also important to acknowledge the past and to acknowledge the future. So you're on the right track. It's kind of important to live out your life the best you can. But it's also important to be cognizant of the fact that there is a future to which we are responsible thereof. And there
Absolutely.
is and there is a past to which the older we get, the more guilty we become. And so you see, really what this all boils down to, and what I told this person is I said, well, we have many different interpretations of of Messiah. However, the overwhelming question of what will actually happen, and I told it this way, I said, it is certainly impossible for the Messiah to come to a planet with so much turmoil, so much hatred, and so much instability, right? All we see around us is instability and problems and, health concerns. Luckily, thanks to God, no pun intended, you and I are living in relative ease, actually, in extremely fortunate circumstances, given the circumstances. So I told my friend, I said, what will happen when the Messiah comes, or perhaps how we will know, is all of the problems of the world will go away. All
Oh,
countries,
that's neat.
all countries would have to stop all their problems. The wars would have to stop, all the sicknesses would have to stop. And when 100% of humanity shows love, which is the meaning of our lives, truly intrinsically, when everybody is able to show love and kindness, then the Messiah will come and show us the truth. So really, I told him, it's not about the Messiah, it's about love. And that is
That's
the
so
answer.
true.
And that is probably what will happen. Now, there are many different interpretations of Messiah, right? What I mean, what will actually happen? I don't know. But I'm 100% sure that with all the problems that we have right now, the Messiah is not going to come because the Messiah can't come if there's a problem. The Messiah will only show the truth when people are ready. So that's kind of what I think will eventually become of Earth and will probably become of us eventually. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I love what you said because I do. I really think I think it's so important to make choices that are
Mm-hmm.
cognizant of a loving future. And I always say to people, and that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying how people are so focused on the end, they're not living in this moment because I often say to people, if we think about a future, which, I do obviously, and I think that we have to make the most loving choices we can because we want to once we're gone, we still want there to be a future. And if we just think about, oh well, it doesn't matter, then and it's this is not my home, then we sometimes live from a place where we think, oh well, who cares? I can use all the resources I want because whatever, the Messiah's coming. Whereas for me, I think it's just like you said, it's so important to just make really, really conscientious choices for our planet and for the people on it.
So then, yeah. And so now, what are some other spiritual issues that you want to get into? You touched on the fact that when you were growing up, you had a lot of interesting spiritual experiences. So why don't you kind of unfold some of these perhaps unconventional experiences that you might have had along your journey so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was growing up, I was my family had joined a religious sect that believed that you couldn't eat certain things and because it would give you, your karma would be affected. So that the things were like meat, fish, and eggs and that sort of thing. So I grew up, for all intents and purposes, I grew up vegetarian. When I went became older, I ended up being vegan because I ended up they thought I had a dairy allergy, which ended up just being a bit of a sensitivity and doesn't really matter. But basically, I started to about, oh, I guess last year, I started to really feel stuck in this way of thinking. And I had abandoned the practice a long time ago, but for some reason I was holding on to the food part of the practice because when you're taught something when you're a child, you like you don't want to just like give it up as an adult because you're just like, oh man, that's a central part of what I was taught. So I ended up, just sticking with the food piece about this and feeling very restricted on what I could eat. Um, and I mean, ethical issues aside, you know, there's arguments for and against eating certain things, and that really goes beyond what I want to actually talk about. Because what I'm interested in talking about is more the piece around me making peace with eating a variety of foods, introducing foods that I'd never eat before. For example, eggs, right? Introducing that and the spiritual difficulties I went through in doing that. It was quite fascinating. I would know logically that I could eat this piece of food that I was about to put in my mouth. But when I would go to put it in my mouth, I would have all these experiences of, well, is this okay to eat? Is it okay to put this in my mouth? Which I suppose you could say, well, that's really silly. You're an adult. You can make your own choices. But when something's ingrained in you, it's very difficult to do. So what I ended where I landed, because when I first contacted you, I was very new to that whole experience. And where I've now landed is, I can eat things, but I want to be conscious of where they come from, maybe like how they were treated, if I can be. I mean, you can't always be, but where I can, I want to be faithful in my consumption. I want to eat, everything in moderation, maybe just not as a moralizing of food, but more as a sort of a spiritual practice because when I was vegan, I there were a lot of things going on in our lives that were quite challenging. And so my resolve to like make everything from scratch and do everything organic and all that stuff, that had to crumble because there was no energy for that. Making your own burgers at home sounds really lovely, but it's a lot of work. And so where I landed was just, okay, I'll introduce some of this food. And because I was getting hungry and eating a lot of processed foods. And the health journey that I've been on, has been quite an interesting one because not only is it a spiritual issue for me, but it's also become an issue of loving my body and actually giving it some of the things that it needs because there were things that I was lacking in that moment, right? So I had to start introducing some different foods, and it was things like iron that's really common if you're well anybody, but especially if you're vegan, because plant-based iron is more difficult to absorb, right, as than meat iron. So there were a lot of layers, um, and I'm now, I'm over that piece where I'm thinking about everything I'm putting in my mouth and what it is. But for a while, it was very challenging. It was causing a lot of anxiety. Now I'm like having fun with it. So, that's a spiritual teaching that has been that I got and then I chose to kind of undo. So I'll leave it there and see if you have anything you wanted me to elaborate on.
How did your family get into this particular sect? You said they got into some sect. Do you care to tell us what that sect was and how they got into it? Or did someone just come up to your family members? Because that can be very interesting how people actually get into these various schools of thought.
Yeah, sure. I think, I was about one, so I don't know exactly how it happened, but I think a different family member. So when I was blind and they realized I was blind, I think if I could think about it, what I would imagine is that they were sort of looking for answers, right? And you're in a very vulnerable place as a parent when all of a sudden something has happened that you didn't expect with your child and you kind of are in a more vulnerable place. And so they got involved and I guess it was called Sant Mutt. And I guess one day they just said, okay, we're gonna eat all our meats and everybody come over for a party and then we're vegetarians. And that's kind of how it started. And I think, as I was growing up, I yeah, I didn't have a lot to do with it because children were actually not very involved. They kind of just didn't think much of involving children, which to me is kind of funny because I'm always involving children. But you turned 19 and then you had to sort of be initiated and there was a whole process and there was a whole it was called the path and you had to follow the path. Um, so um, but a lot of the teachings were passed down to me just by virtue of family members following the traditions, right? And some of them were great, and some of them were sort of not so great. I mean, when you've got a little blind child and there's conversations, not that not that my close family ever had these conversations, but other people did. When there's conversations about, you know, karma and blindness, and you're a child, you tend to, no matter what, sometimes you can misinterpret that, and you can start blaming yourself, or feeling like you're high maintenance or a burden. There's so many things. Like, I think it would have been so helpful for people to really, really delve into what I was actually thinking spiritually, because I ended up having quite a lot of counseling just because I was so guilty about being blind. Because sometimes children will interpret conversations around them in other ways than adults actually mean. And one of the ways that I interpreted was, you did something in a past life that was bad, or you're being punished. And then another interpretation was, you're here to teach us a lesson. And that's a very big burden to put on a child. Although, again, I could have completely misinterpreted because I was a child. Um, so those were some of the teachings I was exposed to when I was in I guess my 20s. Um, I went to I went to a church, and I listened to a sermon by a dear friend who's now passed away. But um, I just remember crying through the entire thing. It was embarrassing because I was sitting in the choir and I just couldn't stop crying, because for the first time in my life, I heard somebody say, it's not your fault. You're blind. You're not blind because someone sinned or you sinned. You're just like, I don't remember what his take on it was, because all I could hear was that I was loved and it was okay. That's all I could hear. After the service, I like ran up to him and gave him a big hug, and he was like, "What are you doing right now?" So that was a huge moment for me.
That's very interesting. I mean, obviously, I was born in the United States and you started out in South Africa, which is important to note that, in a lot of countries, in many countries around the African, continent of Africa, and in some countries in Asia, one of which actually listens to Aaron's opinion very aggressively. Blindness is seen as a sin from past life. Unfortunately, and this really holds back blind people in those countries. If people around you think that you sinned in a past life, it sounds to our American listeners, it sounds silly. But unfortunately, in many developing nations around the world, it's a very prevalent belief that is still within society, unfortunately.
Well, and
Um,
interestingly, sorry,
mhm,
can I interject something?
please do.
I just wanted to say that interesting that you mentioned that. So you are absolutely right in that there are places like that. But for me, the context in which I grew up was actually predominantly not thinking that way. And it was just sort of my little pocket of people that were into it. A lot of people around us actually were like, wait a second, that's not that's not right, and who knows? Like, I don't want to moralize, because I know there's people from a lot of different belief systems listening, but I just, yeah, a lot of people and other extended family was saying, no, hang on a minute, no, not so much.
Right. Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, it just depends upon upon the family. I'm certainly not saying that all of South Africa would believe that it's because you sinned in a past life, but
Yeah.
there is a portion of that population that may believe that in some, in some way, So that's quite a severe issue, Certainly not to be overlooked. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you bring up a very, very good point. And just to kind of expand on your excellent point is, I have worked extensively with blind children, and I have seen how a spiritual belief can actually really impact a child. But I see that now through the through the adult lens because I'm obviously an adult sometimes. But I really just feel like it's an important issue to bring out into the open. And it's a challenging issue to talk about because you don't want to sort of offend people, and you also want to make sure that people have an understanding that, these conversations about why and why is this happening, especially with children, it's okay to have those conversations because sometimes that's the child's way of trying to process their story.
Sure, sure. And by no means am I attempting to create a podcast that offends people.
Oh, I
Although,
know that.
although let me tell you that we have offended plenty of people have been offended by Aaron's opinion over the years, and
You
that's
can't win
fine.
them all, Aaron.
And
Win
That's
them all.
that's the life story, and that's fine. However, to some extent, although I certainly do not go out of my way to offend people, if someone is actually offended and then they come back to me in the future and they say, you know what, you made a good point that offended me, then I would say, well, good, be offended because I had
Yeah,
a good point. So, unfortunately, sometimes to get people's attention, sometimes we do have to be offensive and controversial
yeah,
to
yeah.
get the point all the way across, you know.
And
You
exactly. And I mean,
yeah.
sometimes if you're offended, then you might say, well, oh, that offended me. But in talking about why you're offended and why something's upset you,
Hmm.
sometimes you often make a very valid point, and then I learn from you. So I think, I really hope that people can listen to this because I love your podcast. I love what you're doing, and I hope that
I
people can
appreciate it.
listen to it and say, this is one point of view, and it actually is an opportunity for you to really dig deep and explore why you feel so strongly about whatever you feel strongly about.
Right, right. Absolutely. So, when I was growing up, we didn't really have those conversations about why is Aaron blind, or there was never mind about the why. The why is not important because in the United States, a developed country like the States, nobody really cares why. They wouldn't ask the question why because it wouldn't be an issue. Why wouldn't be an issue, you know? Whereas in a developing nation like South Africa, why would be a huge issue? And why would be a question that they would ask because it's a question that they would ask in a developing country. Nothing against developing countries to which the majority of the world is still behind. Yet, it is important to remember that in a developing country, the chance of someone asking more questions is perhaps a little bit higher than if you grow up just in the United States or Canada or England or, a fully developed country that's kind of past almost that social stage. But I don't know. Ultimately, though, it depends on the parents, ultimately. So then you grew up, and I'm really going to get under your skin, Mitch. I'm really going to ask you something that's totally none of my business, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And if it offends you, it offends you anyway. So, do you want to talk about this whole concept? It says over here in the chat, I'm going to give you a clue. It says Mitch, they slash them. You want to get into the they
Yes.
slash them?
Oh, sure. So I identify as, and I'm totally cool with you asking that. I identify as non-binary. I identify. It really only came to me as an adult, where I just realized, and it was going to the storyteller named Ivan Coyote, and they are a storyteller. They tell amazing stories. I went to their show and I suddenly just heard my story, like besides blindness, I heard my story. And it was so powerful for me because I've always known that I was just a little bit different. And if you look back in history, historically, and I'm only starting to explore the historical roots, but a lot of places in the world believe that there are more than two genders. And so I've really, you know, come into that concept and really embraced it. And, it's really interesting because it has been the most amazingly cool spiritual journey. It has been like an awakening. I've always, I was I was assigned female at birth, but I never felt like a girl. I was just didn't feel like a girl. And it's just like I remember when I was a kid, I used to make people so mad, so angry because I would just not feel like a girl. And I wouldn't act like a girl. I would just not. And when I started to realize kind of that I wanted to embrace that I have both energies. I mean, we all have both energies, but I really just wanted to embrace that and start to live it out in myself. And frankly, I don't care what other people think, like not in a mean way, but this is my life and I probably, chose this too, so I'm going to live it out. And it has been the most amazing experience living more into myself and who I feel that I am is as an absolute revelation. I'm more spiritual than I've ever been in my life. I can tell you 100% I'm much more connected with spirit than I have ever been because I'm being authentic, I'm being me, and I don't take, I don't take any of the books and scriptures and things literally. And I just see myself co-creating with spirit and living into my identity. So yeah, um, I'll just never forget how, if I look back between now and sort of 3 years ago, I can't believe how far I've come, how much I've always loved life, but how much I absolutely embrace life now and live into. I was saying to someone before I came onto this podcast, I said it's kind of like a beautiful unfolding, and it's a journey. Yeah, what have been I just saw in the chat what have been some of my other favorite subjects to learn, but I'll just wait and answer that and just to see if Erin has any comeback on the response.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I can say is, um, what I can say is, I may not agree with, I might not agree with you, and in fact, I'm telling you that my honest opinion, because you want real opinions, is no, I really don't agree with what you said,
Yeah.
but you know what? If you're more spiritual because of your belief, then that's right for you. So you're in the
Exactly.
right because you see how much more you've been helped. And that's the important
Yeah.
thing. Do I perfectly
And it
understand it?
doesn't,
No. Right. Do
yeah,
I
and
perfectly
that's okay.
understand it or agree with it? No. But I don't need to.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
it's it's you. It's you who says there, but there it's you who has the they/them, not Aaron's opinion. We just have
exactly.
Aaron's opinion.
And I mean, there's always going to be things that we don't
Mhm.
agree on,
Right.
and that's okay. We can be
And we
friends. It
shouldn't
doesn't matter.
and we
We
shouldn't
shouldn't.
agree. We shouldn't agree.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's part of the journey is that if if we agreed about everything, then something is definitely wrong. So yeah.
exactly. And
Mhm.
I think we need to,
Mhm.
one of the things I see online is a lot of people they 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 just think they can post whatever they like online and it doesn't matter. And I think that we actually need to learn to respect one another. It doesn't matter whether I agree with everything you
Mhm.
say. If I can respect you. I mean, you and I we have some wonderful conversations, and it doesn't matter
We
if we
really
don't
do.
agree
We
on
really
everything.
do. We really do. You've proven to be one of the most engaged, one of our most engaging people who's showed the greatest level of compassion and interest for what we do here at Aaron's Opinion. And there's many great friends, of course, Latabo and so many great others who have shown a lot of interest. But I've noticed that with you, you are really plugged into this and you really care. And that's why I love talking to you because you're totally there, like I would tell anyone. Do I agree with Mitch? Not 100% of the time, but I agree with how you enter the conversation and how you are fully engaged in the conversation
Oh,
and how you are just totally there, you know.
oh,
Now,
thank
now,
you.
now is it now am I telling you that you're some sort of vegan god or goddess slash they/them? No. But you can be a vegan. You can be one if you want, just as long as you understand that I'm not promoting you to god or goddess or
Yeah,
or anything
exactly.
like that. You can, as we say, you can believe. to some extent, you can believe whatever you want inside your own office, inside your own house. But when to some extent, when you go out into society, there are certain parameters for how you should or shouldn't portray who you truly are. And you portray yourself in a very good way. You have a excellent grip on you. And that's, I think, a very pungent lesson is you know you. And that
Yeah.
really, that is a good lesson for me.
And I think it's
I,
so important
mhm.
to say too that for me, I really I wish we would take that word should right out of the English language because for me, um, yeah, it's it in maybe in certain ways we grow up thinking that we need or should be a certain way. But I'm in my 40s, and as I've said, you know what? My favorite thing to say is other people's opinion of me is none of my business. If you don't like me, just move on. It's fine. I'm not gonna not like you because you don't like me. I'm just like, move on. Just go
Well,
away.
that's Well, someone here, and we do have a very good friend. I don't know if you know who this is, but we have our great buddy in the community, Preston Gaylor, is actually sitting in the audience very nicely. And he did type a question. Now, it's Mitch, this is up to you, not up to me. Do you want me to unmute actually Preston so they could actually join in on the conversation? Because
If
this guy
that's
has
what
a
you
radio
normally
show.
do.
Well, let me see if he wants to. I'm going to actually trigger him to unmute, and because he has his own radio show, he does a lot in podcasting. Let's come on over here. So, Preston, why don't um, I just push their unmute? It does take the computer a second, and then I think they have to acknowledge that I want them to talk or something. I'm not entirely sure how it works. Preston, you can talk if you want. Um, but Preston also wants to know. So, Mitch, on a lighter note, what are some of your favorite subjects?
Hello, everyone. I'm
Oh, there he
here.
is. There he is.
Surprise.
Well, it's not a surprise, Preston. Welcome, welcome, my friend.
Oh,
I
thank
knew
you.
that you were there the whole time. So on point. I know that I can count on you to ask a great question of our great buddy here, Mitch Creedy. So Preston, go ask your deepest question to Mitch Creedy. I really want to see where you're going to take this.
Well, I know I came in the middle of Mitch's speech about what they've been exploring spiritually and stuff, but I wanted to know, and I'm going to tickle their fancy because I want to know uh, what has been your other favorite subjects to learn or, I guess, enter discover.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love music. I love nature. I love exploring hiking and different things, but subjects really, I love to learn. I love science. Find it very, very interesting. I love science. I love learning about the brain, all that kind of stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, yeah, I didn't know if there was a particular subject in particular that you were curious if I was interested in, but those are some of the ones I am.
Well, I can tell you because of my experience, math wasn't my strongest subject in school. I mean, I did pass,
Mhm.
but I was much more of like a English, social studies, public speaking type of guy and technology type of guy.
Nice. Yeah, I love technology as well. Yeah. And it's interesting what you say about math because I was the same as you, but when I worked with the school children, I actually learned to love math. It was fascinating. It was almost like I just needed a different approach.
Wow, yeah, that's true. And it also depends on whatever you are getting in front of.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've
Yeah,
done
it's
like the basics in algebra and thankfully no calculus. I never done calculus.
exactly. It's interesting because if you bring it back to spirituality, I was reading something the other day, and I'm going to misquote it absolutely 100%. But I was reading something about how somebody has the opinion that everything is actually even in our nature and everything is mathematics. It's built with mathematics, which, I mean, it takes the spirituality out of it, but it also kind of is like pretty cool too, if you think about it. And I have no, like, I haven't met this person, so I'm gonna have to ask her more about that when I do meet her.
Wow. Well,
When you,
thankfully
Mhm.
you got a lot of time left, so keep making connections.
Oh, thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah. And to go off of what you were mentioning about the mathematics, no, math was never my thing either, but you're very right that if you completely transition, and this really gets people typing on their keyboards, this really freaks people out. If you drift away from spirituality and start talking about the science end of it all, yes, the universe has a lot of evidence of perfect engineering, which
Mm.
then here's the problem. If you say that you believe in science and engineering, and if you say that the universe was engineered, then people who are some other spiritual people would say that that's impossible for there to be science or engineering. But the universe is so beautiful that it had to have been engineered.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
well, this is a big debate. So, which was it? Is it that it was just created by God without intuition and engineering, or is it a little bit of all of the above? And I argue that my opinion of it all is that I think it's both. I think there are times of godly intervention and other times of basically scientific engineering is what I really think.
I love that because I kind of think it's a bit of both as well. I think that, I don't, as I say, I don't take things literally, and I think to myself, every culture, every tradition, every spiritual tradition has a creation story. And I love, love, love hearing the various creation stories that people have passed down generation to generation. And I often think about um how those stories intertwine. And then I think about, for example, someone who believes in the Big Bang theory, and they're going to be more in line with the scientific approach. But then I sort of think, well, to me, there's spirituality in that because, time is a human-made concept. And so here I am, and I'm reading, say, in the Bible that, God took 6 days to make the earth, but like, how long was the day? How long, if you think about it, right? I just I just never take things literally. So like that. So it's fascinating. Like I love I love to explore those kinds of things. And I think it's so fascinating to kind of speak to people and hear their creation stories. I read one the other day that was an indigenous creation story from here in Canada. And it was all about how Turtle Island came to be and all this kind of, and it was just beautiful. It's just beautiful. I couldn't do it justice, so I'm not going to try, but it was absolutely beautiful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is really fascinating how there are so many different stories behind creation. When in fact, the irony of it all is that the majority or much of the world agrees in the Big Bang.
Yes.
So it's just kind of interesting how we have to have so much debate about it. And I don't mind the debate. I really don't. But I think it's interesting how we
Mhm.
have to fixate so much on the validity of the Big Bang. It's almost like
Yeah.
saying, I guess what I'm really wondering is why do people have such a difficulty with, and I'm not even saying it's a difficulty, it's just the universe and time start, someone pushed go. At some point, something started it. It didn't just appear. It was physically started and triggered by something. But I don't know.
And I think it's just humans need to explain everything. I often think to myself, um, I don't explain who I don't, well, how should I rephrase that? I don't spend time debating and trying to justify and explaining and who I am and stuff. I just don't, because for me, I just am so firmly on the belief that, we want to explain everything. Sometimes we can't, and we're all on our own unique journeys. And we really, you know, often for example, we might get an intuition. We might sort of suddenly realize something. Um, and it could just be a thought about somebody. Oh, you know what? I should call that person. And then sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But often we call that person, and there's a reason that we call them, and we don't realize that until we kind of get into their, on the phone with them or whatever. But often, we want to explain away that intuition. Like I recently was in a group with folks, and we were delving into spirituality and different things, and somebody said, just kind of go. We were sitting, and we were writing down. We were doing some meditation, and we were writing things down, and I think it was me. I said something like, "Oh, well, this probably, isn't right, but this is what I got out of that, or this is what I kind of," and I started to doubt myself. And the person that was leading the group said, "No, don't doubt yourself. If that's what came to you, that's what came to you." I think as humans, we just want to explain everything. Everything has to be logical to us, our logical brain kind of has to take over.
Right. But the problem with that is that there are certain things that happen in life that happen without logic. So there's
Yeah,
certain
for
things that
sure.
we just can't know. That's what
Yeah.
we were saying at the beginning, is that if we knew all the answers, then it would be time for our journey to be over. So
Hmm.
the answer is we have to accept that there will be certain mysteries. Now, unfortunately, I appreciate people who give an answer to everything and truly have that level of spirituality where they would say exactly how everything works. And I also think that if you are able to present an answer to every problem, that's also a problem in itself, because it's showing that you are completely, in some ways, slightly inflexible to, or slightly uncomfortable with not solving every problem. You can't solve every problem. And so you have to be able to accept that not every problem will be solved. But,
Exactly. And
but
it's a bit, I find
yeah.
people who have those easy answers it's quite scary to me. I think, that's actually something that I kind of is a bit of a red flag to me.
Well, it could be. I mean, it depends on what answers they give. Yes, you're right. It could be a red flag. It just depends upon what they say. Yes, you're right, but it also depends.
And
Sometimes we do need clear answers, and that's fine too. Yeah.
yeah, but although sometimes, if we start saying it depends on what answers they give, then we're maybe inserting our bias to say, well, if you give this answer, then it's cool, but if you give that answer, it's not so cool. And then we don't get the opportunity to learn from each other.
Also true.
Hmm.
So then we've come to a point where I want to say thank you, Mitch. Great talk. But of course, before we get going today, what is a question about philosophy and religion? What is a par question that you really want to ask me?
Hmm. That's come up on me a little bit fast.
Well, not at all. We've been talking for an hour. An hour is not fast.
I know.
16. What it took an entire hour. Not at all. It's been coming up.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that my brain doesn't work that way. Um, but I guess my philosophy question for you is kind of what is it that made you want to start? And it may not sound like a philosophy, but you obviously have a passion for this kind of topic. So what was your reasons for starting a podcast, which could potentially be quite deep and controversial and all those other things, which is all good. Why did you want to open up the space to have these discussions?
Well, as you know, I specifically got into podcasting because I wanted my voice to be shared. As an educator, as someone who cares, as someone who's deeply concerned about what's going on in the United States, I wanted to create a space where other blind people can come up to the microphone and share, just like you do, and just like Preston did. By the way, I don't know why Preston fled the scene. I guess he's got a hot date or something. He could have stayed. I don't know
Oh,
what
I
he was
guess
so.
so.
I guess I don't know why that was so scary. I don't know why we scared him off like that. He was welcome to stay. I don't know. This whole thing with people, like this whole thing about people on Zoom in the audience, it's not that scary. Just sit in the audience and watch the show. What are people so afraid of? I just don't get it. I mean, really. I started this. So that's how Aaron's opinion came into being, okay? Is because I needed to create a podcast where I can just get behind my microphone and talk about what I want to talk about and help you to talk about what you need to talk about. The origin of
Nice.
PAR was um we had we had another past great friend here of Aaron's opinion who came up to me one day and he said, "You know, Aaron, I'm going to start a special section on your show. I'm going to start a section called Lard." I said, "You want to start Lard? What on earth is Lard?" I said, he says, "Law and religion uh, debates." I thought about it. I said, "No, we aren't going to have a section on the show called Lard. That's just not going to do. I'm not a lawyer." But I said, "I'm more than happy to talk about philosophy and religion." And then he said, "Well, let's call it hard." And then I said, "Well, why don't we just call it hard? Philosophy and religion."
That's a good idea.
Well, I thought so. So that's how that is the development of this section. And as you know, in just a couple hours, I will actually release an episode of Aaron's Opinion that's not in the par section. So I do want people to come to the understanding that the concepts that we talk about on par are not the concepts that we talk about in the rest of the podcast. And that's a very clear distinction. This is a specific section of Aaron's Opinion dedicated to par. Or in some ways we also talk about lard and pard, but mostly we talk about par, philosophy and religion, you know. So
Oh my goodness.
that's the origin of it is that I discovered that we had a past contributor to Aaron's Opinion who has professionally we needed to part ways, but we had a past contributor who also had a great interest in this, and he contributed a lot to the show while he was here. And so I wanted to be able to create a section where people like you can come up to me and have this type of conversation. And so
Nice.
that's why. And I've noticed of you that you truly want to be here and you truly have this interest. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're very welcome here. And I would like to connect with you over on WhatsApp in a few hours. So keep your eyes open for a little ding from WhatsApp from me about a specific question that I do have.
Okay.
But so if someone having nothing to do with that though, great talk today. And if someone wants to get in touch with Mitch, how would they do it?
At the moment, the best way is just Facebook. If you search for Mitch Creedy. Um, do you need me to spell that, Aaron, or do you put that in the notes?
Why don't both? But why don't you type up one of the things is I want you to type up your note that you want me to put for the description as always. But yeah, why don't you type it up when you do? But yes, you can also spell it.
Okay. So Mitch and then Creed as in Delta Y, 2 words. If you do friend me on Facebook, just pop me a message and say that you listen to the podcast, because there's a lot of like fake profiles on Facebook right now.
Yeah, I know.
Once that happens, then once I connect with you and I know that you're legit, then I'll add you. And all I ask is if you are going to friend me, that you do so out of respect. If you disagree with who I am and what I am, then and you feel that you're going to try and change me or evangelize, just don't bother sending me a friend request. But if you're going to be, if you're just curious and want to get to know me, then by all means, please do.
Well, good. All right, everybody, well, comment below on your thoughts about this conversation. I'm sure that we will have many, I really hope that we will have many comments and many inputs about this. I do find that people are very shy about commenting. So, but yes, we will definitely tag you and we will tag Preston. I'm also friends with Preston too. You'll see who he is.
Nice.
I'll tag Preston also in the upload. Why not? But anyway, very good talk, and we'll catch up soon. So everybody, let's see over here. Okay, so just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of Par. Mitch, you did a great job and you are always welcome. Remember, if you are at home listening or watching and you also want to contribute a par to Aaron's opinion, definitely reach out. Let me know. Tell me about your journey and let me know why you specifically want to contribute a par. Or if you want me to just interview you on the standard, just open-ended standard section of Aaron's opinion where we generally don't talk about par, let me know too. I'd love to hear from you. All right, everybody. Well, take care, everybody, and stay safe out there, and we'll be back soon. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow. For those of you who are still on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Like the video, comment below, tickle the bell notification to know when we go live next. All right, thanks so much, Preston, for joining us in the chat, as I always like to say. Thank you for coming today, and I hope to expand my audience, and I really want to have a bigger virtual audience for those of you who are most interested. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Preston, and thank you, Mitch Creedy, and I will catch up with you in a few hours. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon. So take care, and keep podcasting, everybody, and help one person a day. Help 1 million people